Hello and welcome to the Clear Voice Podcast. I'm your host, James Groom. Today we're sitting down with a couple HR professionals to talk about engagement and some other very vital things for municipal governments and just organizations in general. With me is the president of Clear Career Professionals, Michael Bays. How's it going, Mike?
Doing good, James, and appreciate you having me on again. Hopefully people aren't getting tired of hearing my voice, but I'm really excited about this topic. We delved into culture and sort of the importance of leadership in those cultures last week. We have two of our powerhouse HR folks that are working with Clear on this podcast today, and I'll let you introduce them. But the really amazing thing about Clear, James, is that we have so many amazing people that have long tenured experience in municipal government in different roles. I'm so excited about these guests because, their experience in what they've done can really move people forward.
Yeah, exactly. We're excited to have them on. First, I'd like to introduce Brian Beasley. Brian, can you say hello to everybody and tell us a little bit about yourself and your leadership journey?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for having me on, James and Mike. I appreciate it. I am a 32-year HR veteran, if people can say that, 20 years in the Fortune 5 world, and the last 12 years in the municipal government world. My background is all human resources, typically at a strategic level, but I've ran everything that you can think of that has an HR tag or risk management tag. Now I support Clear as a vice president of consulting services for Clear and get to do this fun stuff for cities across the nation.
That's great. Thanks for coming on. We also have Deanna Hendrix, who's also a vice president and co-founder of Clear. Deanna, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning, James. It's good to see you. I started with Clear after primarily focusing on recruitment, talent acquisition, talent development with the workforce. And now it's just a different way to apply those skills and everything I've learned with that and bring that into municipal government. So I'm happy to be here, happy to see you guys. I'm ready to delve into engagement.
Well, it's great to have you, and we appreciate your time. Let's start out talking a little bit about engagement. Previously, we've talked a little bit about culture and how important that is. And one of the ways to drive positive culture is with positive engagement inside the workforce. Brian, can you tell me a little bit about engagement, why it's important, and how do we improve upon it?
Sure. So, as you noted, culture really drives the engagement of the organization. But once we've established what that culture is, the level of engagement is going to drive, James, the outcomes for the city. So if you have a very engaged workforce, then you're going to see that in the results financially in the organization as a whole across departments. So it could be simply in a individual department and how that workforce is engaged and how they tie into the culture of the organization, or it can be citywide. So of course we try to get to a whole citywide function, but you can do it individual department as well.
Thank you for that. Deanna, can you tell us a little bit about how that applies to technology in the workplace and younger generations showing up? Looking across the spectrum, you've got boomers still in some of these jobs and retiring out, and Gen X is prevalent in the workforce, and millennials have been there for a while with Gen Z and even Gen Alpha showing up in the workforce. How does engagement with these younger generations related to all the new tech tools that we have now in the workplace?
Sure. I think that engagement now is less about having a nice break room and everybody collaborating in that way and more about feeling connected to the purpose of the organization, especially now that fully remote teams are more prevalent, especially after COVID. So I think that we have to be more creative with how we're engaging.
How can leaders look at that? Do I go in person? Do I do everything electronically? What would you say to a leader who's even confused about which mechanism to use?
Well, I think you really have to communicate with your team and figure out what works best for you. If you're sending a ton of emails every day and you're not really getting anything back, they may be more responsive to in-person interactions. Every individual is different, and you have to keep a pulse on what works and what doesn't.
And James, I think that if you have a organization that's looking for that engagement, especially if you have folks that are remote and they're not physically there, you have to assess as leadership what the deliverables are, how can they deliver, what's valuable to those generations. As millennials and Gen Z, they tend to value more time to themselves. But of course, we have a business to run, and that's the business of the cities. They have to be able to deliver those things. And those individual leaders, HR should be helping drive that decision-making process to help them. What are the tools that they need to engage in? And as Deanna said, that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. You might have an accounting department that they're really good, but they may need less engagement from a leader, but they need to know that that leader is walking to benefit them, to look for them to deliver the right things. And that's got to be a clear, consistent message across the organization. So regardless of the generational group that you're looking at, what do they value? And those department heads, that city management team, they need to understand what those things are and start to engage that way.
Yeah, definitely. Michael, do you have anything to add on these generational differences in engagement?
Here at Clear, we try to really find that fine balance between technology and then the personal communication, one-on-one time where we actually get to speak what I say human to each other. And it's really interesting to see, and I'd love to get Brian and Deanna's perspective on this, but we recently did a police department org review for a city, and the chief was of a younger generation and had really embraced technology, so much so that one of our recommendations was to back off of technology because what was happening in the workforce was they had all the technology in the world, but what we know about technology is it adds to the workload a little bit. You have to have somebody manage that. You have to have somebody look at the data. You have to have somebody kind of working on the back end to make sure the technology is functioning properly. And when you have maybe a smaller organization or even in big organizations, that can really become cumbersome. So Brian, how does that impact what we're doing in cities? And have you ever seen that where there's almost an over-reliance on trying to move to a technical base?
Absolutely, Mike. I think that's well said because folks will get carried away in the data. The data we need to drive the business, no doubt. But what ends up happening is you become so reliant on it, and maybe you only have one or two people in most organizations that really can manage that well. If you lose that person, or if they're not engaged, for lack of a better term, with the rest of the organization, say a police department in this example, then you're going to run into problems. The second piece of that is simply that maybe officers don't adopt or adapt to the technology, that they're utilizing now. Obviously, you have to bridge that gap and bring them up to speed. But if it becomes over cumbersome and it's not allowing them to focus on the why we do work, so engagement's about the why, right? Why are we doing the things we're doing? Then it loses its value. And I think you've hit the nail on the head because we might need to come in as Clear, assess what their values and mission and culture are, and then look at what are the tools they're using, why are they using those tools, and is it really getting in the way, or is it really advancing the organizational drive that they need to have? So it certainly can do both, and adoption of those technologies or even that engagement level is going to be critical.
We've talked before about how programs are important, but they shouldn't just be check boxes. They shouldn't feel like programs. A lot of leaders will have routine check-ins, whether that be a monthly or weekly basis with their teams. How do you make things like that not seem like it's functionary? How can you connect deeper on that engagement level and make people know that you're not just doing it because somebody told you have to?
It's a slow process, just like y'all noted in the last podcast. Culture takes some time to really drive, and you either have it by default or you define it. And when you start to go through the engagement process, you're probably going to want to identify your values and key things that drive the organization, which are going to be different by individual cities or individual businesses. What drives them? What's the board of directors or the city council looking for, and how do we implement that and push it down? But you have to go back to how do you actually drive the individuals to engage in that? And so I would say over time, you're going to start to tie those values to the individual, whether that is in some sort of reward system, which Clear can do as well, where we would design a compensation strategy that might balance out not only the what you deliver, but the how you deliver it. I was told a long time ago by a senior vice president of HR in a Fortune 5 company is not just about what you deliver, but how you go about delivering it. And certainly if we can keep problems from reaching the level of the city administrator, the city manager, and it's because our people are engaged and they're service oriented and they're doing it for the why, and they've defined what that why is, then you're going to see that level of politics, for lack of a better term, come down, and we're all going to be rowing in the same direction. But tying them to reward systems, we don't have the same tools as the private sector does. But certainly once we've established that culture and those visions and mission, we can start to tie those behaviors to certain outcomes. Just as an example, I'm going to get a merit increase or a step increase. Half of that, let's say, or 25% of that is based on how I delivered. I was able to bring in multiple cities for Clear, and Mike's rewarding me based on that. But did I build relationships? Did I do it the Clear way? Or did I do it the way that the organization wants me to do it? And I get tied my actual pay maybe, or days off, or any type of mechanism that you wish to incentivize on, the city still can. That's what you do, is you start to embed those particular engagement activities based on the values that the organization has put forward.
Michael, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's really awesome, Brian. And something that I think would love to get your thoughts on is oftentimes true authenticity in leadership really, really comes from maybe breaking the rhythm. And I know a lot of organizations and leaders kind of fall into that deal where we start doing things that looks like they're working, and so we just continue to do those things. What I always like to do in the organizations I've led, or if I'm working as a consultant, is look at ways to break the rhythm. And that can be just by doing something as simple as shooting a text or bringing coffee to somebody, or maybe just asking, how are you doing? But really trying to kind of throw that OODA loop in somebody's mind. They maybe are kind of performing okay, but you really want to set them up to a higher level, another level. So how do you do that?
Sure. I think that's imperative for all organizations, regardless of municipal world or whether it's private sector world. The basis of that is exactly what you said, Mike. You're building a relationship. So whether that's through the department head or you're one-on-one with that individual, you start to know the individuals or the individual department personalities and how they tie. What would shake things up? Would it shake things up to just show up and bring coffee? Would it shake up things to show up one day and bring lunch, those kind of things? Or is it, hey, this team has done so well, we get a half day off? There's various mechanisms, but basically to show the authenticity of the leadership. And again, whether that's the city manager or that's the department head, as long as they have support of the city management team, or it's HR, engaging in those workforce departments and saying, this is what we value. We want to demonstrate that we value this. But if you want that level of relationship, that engagement, that trust factor, which all city leaders want, because it helps drive their end results, right? Then you have to get some level of personable back and forth. Maybe that's not in person, one-on-one, but they know through the authenticity of that leader because they've seen that leader implement things like that. Oh, you mean that we showed up today in the break room and there's fresh donuts and it says, thanks team for doing such a great job. Appreciate you, director, whatever, right? And it doesn't have to be a lot of engagement that way, like one-on-one time, but people feel valued. And especially, like James said earlier about the differences of millennials and Gen Z, statistically, that's a real key thing there. How do you keep them focused on the things they want? They got to feel like they have a place in the organization. Shaking things up, like you're saying, Mike, helps them feel like they have a place in the organization.
Yeah, and Brian, I think it's really important. Like in my own world, I've changed language a little bit. Like a shift in language can be really important. So in those opportunities where I could typically say I appreciate it, I have changed that out to say I appreciate you. You'd be so amazed to see what response I get, whether it's in person or even if I just send a text. And I intentionally have shifted that language to do that. And Deanna, I know that you've worked in some organizations and then consulted with organizations in your different roles. These things weren't taking place or things like that. What have you experienced?
Just bird's eye view from a good culture to a bad culture. I mean, I've seen where if you don't have intention behind your leadership and you're not engaging and having that feedback loop, the culture tends to shape itself, and oftentimes in a way that is not planned for, definitely not what you want to see. And so really the intentionality and, like you say, the authenticity behind it is really important.
Yeah, exactly. Brian, I know you said this in so many words, but when you're talking about bringing that lunch or those donuts in, I think people need to understand that that's just to get your foot in the door. That's not the thing that people are going to be excited that you brought them. It's you. Your time is the most valuable thing that you are giving, and you're using that time to show them how much you appreciate them. The donuts are nice, but it really just is the excuse to get in and provide that meaningful feedback for those teams. When we're talking about engagement and tie that back into leadership development and preparing people for internal promotions and things about that, Brian, what can you say about all that?
I think that a lot of organizations really do, and this is industry wide. We don't necessarily business to business do a great job at succession planning. And we certainly don't do a good job of what I call talent reviews. Some do, and there are tools out there to help. But I think for organizations to be ultimately successful and consistently successful, especially when we've all experienced where that senior management team has left the organization. Maybe it's a change in council and the city managers decided to move on as well because of the change in council, which happens. But that is so disruptive, James, in the organization as a whole, and it can really torch a culture and really sink engagement in the organization, which then sinks the outcomes and the things that they are actually driving for, the results that the council wants to see. I like to use a tool called talent review. It's an added step to succession planning. And essentially you're looking across the organization, a deeper dive, if you will, than succession planning. If we have a talent review where we're looking throughout the organization and we're seeing what people have key skill sets that the city's looking for or the business is looking for, and then we apply that with cross-departmental conversations, and it's an organized process, if you will. But they're looking at, you mean Deanna has those skill sets? That's amazing. I didn't know Deanna had those skill sets. I thought she wanted to do director of HR work forever. I didn't really even think that she might want to go into city management. But those conversations happen, and they happen in a more formalized process that you can really walk through. That doesn't mean at the end of the day, James, as a high level, that council or city managers pick those folks, but it gives that tool for them to have that in their bailiwick to look at something, assess the skills, assess the needs of the organization. Maybe it's even, are they ready now, ready future, not going to be ready for a while. That I like to call this steady Eddie and steady Jane, that we need those, right? Organizations need the people at the end of the day that meet expectations and they do the job. They're not always trying to get to the next level job, but we also need the folks that want to be the next city manager or the next HR director, et cetera. So how do you assess that? This is a formalized tool that I like to use across organizations. Very helpful.
It sounds like you're almost taking an inventory of what people have. And once you get your inventory done, I would assume that you can also decide or help people decide what they need the next. What's the next step for them? What does their journey need next? What class, what certification, what skill are they missing? I'm assuming that you would use those to kind of plan for the future leadership development for all your folks.
Absolutely. If you have a very strategic partnering in the HR team, they ought to take that information once Clear has gone through and done that assessment and provided that feedback, and the city knows which direction they want to go in. Then you're going to pull out really what are better succession planning for that organization, but then development skills. The reality of it is, I can't tell you how often I go into both private and public sector businesses in consulting where a leader, they may be really great. And in fact, they got promoted because they were great at their job. They were great at being an engineer, or they were great at being an accountant. And so now they're the director of engineering, or they are the CFO for the city, but they don't have the leadership skills. And it sinks that city manager and that team quickly because they are really struggling. Really at this level, 80% of their job is not engineering. 80% of their job is leading people. And so how do you go about doing that? This would allow a tool, an inventory, and a path to drive those tools forward for HR to engage within the workforce and say, okay, here's what Brian is needing, and have a dialogue about that. And maybe Brian doesn't want to do that. That's perfectly fine. But then at least the organization knows that. And so they move in a different box at that point. Or, wow, he wants to be the next whatever. Okay, these skills are needed in that so that ultimately the organization's successful. There's not problems bubbling up to the leadership. And that's why Deanna and I will always have a job somewhere, because people are people. This is a great tool to use.
Deanna, can you talk a little bit about how something like a talent review and then following up with that leadership internal development, does that impact a organization's retention of employees, and why is it important to retain those employees as much as you can?
Well, employees are any organization's greatest asset. First of all, I think that sometimes people forget that. But in talent reviews, what I've seen a lot is that leaders will avoid them sometimes for fear of losing good employees. When you ignore people that have a vision where they want to advance, like Brian was saying, maybe they're in one department and you have no idea that they one day want to be city manager, you're going to lose them anyway. And so it's really important to have that constant communication, constant engagement with employees so that what their goals are to begin to develop their skills and identify those skills gaps and try to get them where they want to be.
Brian, why do you think cities might not opt to do talent reviews?
One, because it's a more rigorous process, and we are all very busy. Typically, cities as a whole, James, you know this, but limited budgets, limited resources, a lot to do. I don't think that algorithm changes when you're in the private sector either. They're still doing the same things and they're trying to do it lean and efficient. But cities are running multiple businesses. It's a public safety business. It's a water business. It's a trash business. All kinds of businesses are being ran by that leadership team. They're very busy, and that takes a little bit more rigor. But the results of it actually streamline and help things become more efficient if we actually utilize them and buy into them.
Yeah, and if I can chime in on that, James, for a second, I think we hear this a lot from folks we work with is pick your heart. If you are working at the front end and identifying talent, retaining employees, focusing on engagement, it takes a lot of time and effort and maybe some financial resources to achieve what you're trying to achieve there. The other heart of that is if you don't, then the recruiting aspect and bringing new employees in, and then the loss of institutional knowledge is out the door. What heart do you want to pick, right?
Yeah, if you have extreme turnover, which a lot of places do, especially in public works departments and in parks departments, where the marketplace is, cities across Texas are having to pay a certain level because they're competing with the Wendy's of the world or the McDonald's of the world that are, I can go do less work, not as hard, not as mind provoking as I'm in streets, but I can make more money in the air conditioned world. If you're not saving those people, James, and making sure that the turnover that's significant, I mean, it ranges from 50% of the cost on up of that individual job. So you're spending those dollars ultimately. So you have to manage that well. And if you're using a talent review process and they know that they're part of that process, which is key, being open and transparent and authentic as you walk through those processes, people buy into what my future state is. And then we have other tools that are better than the private sector when we're looking at pension plans for cities, those kind of things. So when you start to tie those things together, and wow, like Deanna said, you're looking at me and I'm one of the most valuable assets, then, and I feel like I'm a valuable asset. Now I'm not looking at that opportunity to leave for a buck more, because long term, I call it penny wise and pound foolish. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Let's be pound wise and, put the investment of the time and effort and the drivers for those individuals where they feel valued.
And isn't that amazing? You were talking about how you make people feel. I've worked in places where we've had a bad budget year or two, and the communication and the culture, it felt like the boss and even the council was engaged with the employees and wanted great things, but sometimes that budget's not there. We've gone through COVID and a bunch of other things that have massively impacted city budgets. But if you've got that culture where people feel like you are going to take care of them, even if you can't do it this year, that it's less of a problem. And sometimes you can have a culture where you are really doing everything you can and giving people great raises and competing with all these other cities. They still don't feel valued. That's because of the culture. That's how you're engaging with them and talking about them. And that's more important almost how they feel about it than what you're actually doing.
I would totally agree with that. You have to have an organizational culture that is clearly transparent and people buy into. It's that foot in the door, James, like you said, with the donuts or the lunch or whatever. But it goes past that. That old saying of walk the walk. That's an old cliche, but it's real. They have to see that their leaders are walking the walk, and that includes council. I can't tell you how often we recruit for folks, And then they watch a city council meeting and they're like, wow, I'm not going there. I see how they either belittle the staff or, wow, I really want to be there because they really, even in tough years, they're really supporting that organization as a whole. And that kind of drives our decisions because not everything's not money, and feeling a part of a team is important. I call it the work family because we're more at work than we are at home. And so it's work for a reason. I don't call it vacation in the Bahamas. So there's going to be days that Deanna and I have to go in and terminate somebody, which fortunately happens way less now because we manage performance really well. But when it does, it's not a fun time. It's work for a reason. But overall, I really enjoy the teams I work with and why I'm doing what I'm doing, and seeing, especially in the public sector, seeing the results service the community like it does. You don't really get that as much in the private sector because I'm selling my product, I'm selling to make a profit. Whereas, wow, there wasn't a park there, now there's a park there. Or did you see all the businesses join the city that came in this last year through economic development? Why? Because we had a truly focused, engaged workforce that helped drive that. They tied themselves to the council and to the city leadership because they felt valued.
Exactly. One of the things you were talking about is basically modeling the behavior, walking the walk. I'd like to hear kind of everybody's thoughts on this because this is an idea that's been around a long time. And what about 360 reviews? How does that, how do you implement those? What's the good side, the bad side, and how does that engage your employees when you're letting them provide that necessary feedback to you during the review process?
It's another tool, James, that is utilized for all businesses to get feedback. It is something that is a little bit more rigorous in nature. Now, you can streamline it, which I would recommend, especially for a city, where you pick a handful of that 360 feedback. It's not just open-ended, where people can start to feel beat up. Pro and a con to it. But the pros, I would say, is you're getting a lot more feedback as an employee. So that employee understands, and they don't necessarily know who's writing it. You might even go as far as to say to that employee, hey, give me a customer that you support, that you want to get feedback from, and then give me a person that you may not want to get feedback from. Or the leader is so engaged with that organization that they know, okay, I want to talk to the negative Nellies out there because they exist, and then get that feedback on that individual. And all it's supposed to do is, at the end of the day, and I'll use my terminology, iron sharpens iron. If I'm taking the feedback that Deanna gives me or Mike gives me, and I'm working that into my own behaviors, I'm only going to get better. And whether that's really, really good feedback or that's constructive feedback or negative feedback, I have the accountability then to take that and make myself better. And if I'm really engaged and I know that there's value because of all the other levers that we've talked about today and the levers that you and Mike talked about in the last podcast, where I know that end result, the organization is out to support me and not out to give me, right? Because I've seen these things, it's transparent, it's authentic, then I'm going to utilize those tools better, and I'm going to receive that and make a difference and change. So it works itself right back into the talent review. It certainly works itself into a step increase or a merit increase, depending on what you're on. I've had a police chief a long time ago when I first started. He said, Brian, how do I know what a good officer is versus a bad officer? Because they basically do the same thing. And I said, Chief, that's a great question, but I can't answer that for you. But I bet you if you walk into your organization and you ask, who do you want to work with and who do you not want to work with? I guarantee you that the group is going to come up with the same couple of folks, both on the negative and on the positive. So they recognize it. So shouldn't you recognize it as the leader? And he's like, that's a really good point. How do I do that? Well, we start to do these engagement tools. We start to use tools like talent review and tools like 360 feedback. Again, you don't have to make it overly cumbersome, but you can start to have those assessments.
Yeah, and that the truth that in all these organizations, a lot of times everybody knows who the one or two problems are, and depending on the organization, they may not be working on those things. Michael, you have any thoughts on 360 reviews?
I really love Brian's input on that and think it's important to consider what the culture looks like. I think they can also be a nightmare in my experience too. When I look at coming from kind of an athletic background, if you're playing football and you can't do a basic handoff, then you probably shouldn't start working on motion and deeper pass plays. I think there's a lot of organizations that need to assess that, but more importantly, a lot of leaders that need to assess, when a 360 review comes back, and am I humble enough? Have I taken enough medicine to defeat that ego to where I'm willing to take the information in, and then do my employees feel like they're safe? If we create a culture where we're like, well, hey, I got a 360 review, but if your employees don't feel safe, they may say one or two kind of simple things that you can grow on, but they're not really going to give you the full picture. And so I think, you need to kind of assess the organization. That's one thing that Clear can do, is really work with the management team and get somebody like Brian or Deanna or some of our other HR folks in to go, hey, when we're looking at this 360 review, how is that going to impact you as an individual, as a leader?
I 1000% agree with Mike. I think that they're sometimes more cumbersome than they're worth. But if you were to do that, and you were to do it specifically for leadership, kind of going back to that humble leader, I think that's where we could start the other pieces of engagement. Maybe you don't drive that all the way through the organization, but you get a 360 feedback loop on department heads. That's something that would prove to be authentic and real. And then simply from there, you're pulling out, no, we don't necessarily need that for the organization, but we need to engage a Clear, or we need to engage HR to drive more items performance-wise and feedback loops through the rest of the organization. So you don't have to make it so overly cumbersome, but you're getting a lot of development outcomes out of that upper leadership understanding each other.
And it almost seems like you can implement something like this, which is a program, but we're trying to get to the point where even if you continue doing 360 reviews, the culture of the organization is such that even though you're the leader, I can come to you and provide this feedback to you and know that, like Michael's point, that it's safe for me to say, hey, I didn't like this, or I don't think this is going to work. And sometimes those employees are going to be right. Sometimes they have missing pieces of information that you can provide to them. Sometimes there's something critical that you may have missed yourself. So it's almost like creating a program in order to get it from being a program into just normal, everyday part of your organization.
I would completely agree with that. How do you get the outcome that you want? And it's a tool, but ultimately, if you can drive better behaviors and better outcomes through various mechanisms, that's what you're looking for.
Definitely. Deanna, have you seen these used and seen them go positive or negative in an organization?
I've seen it go really either way, but I think what I've seen a lot of is there's sort of an illusion in certain organizations that everything's fine. Everybody kind of pretends everything's fine, but the trust isn't there to have any of these conversations. You can't go to a leader and tell them something that's a problem because you have a fear. It's a symptom that the trust in the organization is broken down in that way. You shouldn't have to fear retaliation for, just really expressing what's going on, but it is a real problem. And so I think something that Clear does really well is come in and have those conversations with all of the staff. Where the feedback is coming from is not really as important as what the information is and what the solutions are.
Yeah, exactly. I know as Colin Powell said something about leadership is all about solving problems. The day your soldiers stop bringing you problems is the day you stop leading them. So if they can't come talk to you, then you're not going to be effective in your job.
That's absolutely right. I call it culture diagnostics because Deanna's right. They're not going to necessarily share that with the leaders if they feel like there's some sort of retaliation, or it's just, even if they perceive that. Perception is the reality, as we all say, right? So at the end of the day, if we can come in as Clear and we can do an assessment and give the real feedback, and that's what leaders should want so that we can try to drive different outcomes and different behaviors.
James, I just want to, mention that we're working throughout these organizations, and it was talked about earlier how important city councils are and the way in which they conduct themselves. And so when we get in and do, a council retreat or have the one-on-one sessions, if we're, for instance, hiring for a city manager and we get to meet with the council, we always try to impart to them, it starts with them. They're the direct voice of the community, people that put them in office to achieve the visions and make sure that the community is somewhere where it's enjoyable to live, where the quality of life is something that's, attractive to people. And when you start with meeting with the council all the way down to doing some of the things that Brian can talk about, it's a holistic plan. And there's not just one thing that Clear can do. We have a team of over 20 people who've spent their life dedicated to service. So those 20 people have the ability to get in and really have a lot of life experience with what we're doing. But, I think people should look at Clear as more of a company that can come in and we can talk about what your problems are, and then we can help find those solutions. But Brian, I'll leave some of the specific products to you and Deanna.
Sure. I do think that's 100% accurate, Mike. It's what we can deliver for organizations. It isn't just recruiting, isn't just talent, putting heads in the seats. And that's probably the nice way to put it. But we're able to be a strategic partner. Clear is really a total human resources toolbox for the municipal and local government world, as well as for businesses, because we kind of extend ourselves out to private sector as well. But the tools in place are, recruiting, culture design. We do compensation studies and have an easy platform to do that on and really good turnaround, but it allows cities for sure to know where they stand. They get to drive who they want to compare to, what positions they want to compare to. So we have that capacity. And in the leadership realm, you have 20 folks that have really developed over many, many years of service and business ownership for that matter to impart those tools to the executive team and the departments. But at the end of the day, like this topic was about, if your workforce isn't engaged and you haven't done the things that Clear can certainly come in and help you assess, because you don't know what you don't know. And they're not telling you always the truth. They're telling you what you want to hear. I call it the elevator speech. If somebody caught you in the elevator and asked you, what do you like about this city? I would hope, after Clear's been there for sure, that they're going to say, this culture values me and values the citizen who we serve. And I like working here because of that culture. And if they just summed it up like that, that's a huge win for the organization. That's a huge win for Clear.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Mike, if there's a city leader out there that feels like a council retreat might bring their council and staff closer together and be able to solve some of these problems, or maybe they have a problem that they don't even know what solution they need, how do they get a hold of Clear and look for those solutions?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way is our website is really easy to navigate. If you can't make the website and you just want to shoot an email, you can always send to info@clearcareerpro.com just to kind of discuss what your needs are. And that will go to our team and we will direct that to, for instance, if it's an HR kind of issue, that'll land on probably Brian's desk. If it's something related to a management issue or some other things, we'll definitely get that out to the team member who can be most impactful and get back to them. But, we love our cities that we get to work with. And, at the heart of what we do is the Clear way, being impactful and positive and leading forward in the communities we love to serve.
Thank you. And to close out, I just want to get everybody an opportunity to give a closing thought, just something that you can leave people with. Brian, do you want to go first?
I would say if there's one thing that organization leadership could put out is to lead with authenticity and transparency. If you do that, especially if you're getting the feedback that maybe you're not, and you correct those things, and people see that, then they really buy in. So you start trying to want to wear the patch that you're wearing, whether that's, whatever city it is, and you're happy to wear that insignia. I'm happy to wear a Clear Career Professional shirt. I'm proud of it, and that will help drive outcomes at the end of the day and keep people retained. So that would be a real quick one.
Thank you so much for that. Deanna, what can you tell the folks before we get off here?
I'll leave you with this. We've covered a lot of ground today. The Clear, we don't go out to just make all the money in the world. Every person on our team, our heart is in service. When we're called to your organization to try to identify problems, you don't even have to have it figured out. We'll work with you to try to identify what those issues are and work on a step-by-step and give solutions that you can actually implement and get you to a better place. And it's not a one and done thing. I mean, you can always reach back out if you need assistance in moving forward in those plans, or if the organization has shifted, maybe the structure has changed. We're always here. We're always a resource. And sometimes that's just a phone call. It's not always a paid thing that we're even doing. I mean, I think Mike gets calls all the time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but just advice. We're just trying to be a resource
Well, thank you so much. Michael, final thoughts?
We really appreciate both Deanna and Brian being on our team and the deep knowledge they bring about human resources and just how they can be impactful in people's lives. At our core, I think people want to serve and they want to serve in an organization where they feel they're impactful. And I really appreciate what you guys do. And thank you for being on this program and really trying to give some advice to people who are out there listening.
Thank you, Mike.
My final thought is anybody that's made it to the end of this podcast, you clearly are either one of our friends, which we appreciate, or you are here for self-improvement, which we also appreciate you. If you're in public sector, it is about services. It is very difficult getting things right with the budgets that we have and the time that we have. Doing everything perfectly is just not going to happen. Living that life where you're going to face scrutiny, even when you're doing as much as you can, is very difficult. And if you're out here on your off time trying to figure out what the next step is, we really appreciate you taking that time. That's all I have for today, and we appreciate our guest. Michael, thank you for being here as well, and we will see everybody next time.